Thank you very much, Mr. President of the Assembly, Director General, distinguished delegates, friends and colleagues. I'd like at the outset to thank Italy and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in particular for this beautiful venue and for your warm and generous hospitality. And I hope that despite the delicious lunch, some of you will still manage to stay awake while I speak. I'd also like to thank IDLO and Irene Khan for this invitation and for Irene's energetic and visionary leadership, which I've admired over many years of knowing one another. I listened carefully at the Assembly this morning, and I can see what so many of you in this room have done to put IDLO on a strong and footing and moving in a very positive trajectory towards the future. This afternoon, as the Director General indicated, I'd like to talk a little about what, from a UN perspective, has been achieved in the realm of the rule of law and what some of the outstanding challenges still are. So the importance of the rule of law is, of course, enshrined in the preamble of the UN Charter. However, over the last 20 years, there's been a growing realization of the fundamental practical importance of the application of the rule of law as a basis and a prerequisite for sustainable peace and development. The pivotal importance is arguably better recognized now than ever before, culminating in the adoption of SDG 16 and subsequent Security Council and GA resolutions on sustaining peace. As a practical matter, however, the realization of the importance of rule of law to peace building came painfully for the United Nations. In 1999, I was deployed in two of the rare situations where the UN actually was given by the Security Council the role of a transitional government with all government functions. That was in Kosovo and in Timor-Leste. In both cases, no adequate provision had been made in the original mission planning for any sort of rule of law capacity. We learned at great difficulty just how critical to the stability of both transitions it was to get rule of law institutions off the ground. In Kosovo in 1999, the departure of Yugoslav forces and administration left a rule of law vacuum that the international forces and the UN were very slow to come to grips with. There was an orchestrated campaign of violence and persecution against non-Albanian residents, with murders, kidnapping, torture, arson, and illegal property occupation, which we took some time in bringing under control. In East Timor, in 1999, lack of planning for the penal system meant the prisoners literally had to be set free, as there was no adequate space to hold them, and budgets had to be improvised to repair prisons after breakouts and to provide food to the prisoners. After leading both missions in East Timor and Kosovo, Sergio Vieira de Mello concluded, unlike other nation-building tasks, law and order cannot wait. For the longer an absence of rule of law prevails, the more inequality, criminality, discrimination take root, and the harder it becomes to eradicate them. After those experiences, the United Nations built up its institutional capacities to support the rule of law. In 2000, the Brahimi report called for an increased focus on rule of law and the deployment of justice expertise in post-conflict contexts. And in 2007, the Office of Rule of Law and Security Institutions was established within peacekeeping. And at roughly the same time, a rule of law unit, which now I supervise, was established in the Secretary General's office. In 2016, I served in the Central African Republic, as the Director General indicated. It's one of the world's most remote and conflict-affected countries. The UN has no transitional administration mandate there, but under Security Council Resolution 2217 of 2015, the mission, MINUSCA, does have a robust mandate to support national efforts of re-establishing the rule of law through support to the police, to the judicial and penitentiary system. Unlike in Kosovo and East Timor, The mission benefited from the outset from a robust justice and corrections section made up of over 100 international personnel across the Central African Republic. They provide support in the establishment and functioning of the National Special Criminal Court, something that a former IDLO colleague is now working on. They support efforts to reinstate the criminal justice system and also work on the reform of the penitentiary system. With 2,000 international police officers, 4 times the number available in the early months of the Kosovo and East Timor missions, MINUSCA is also engaged in building up the national police capacity. The difference between my early experiences and the approach in the Central African Republic is a reminder of how much some things have changed and how today we use the rule of law mandates to achieve broader peace and security and development goals. But despite consensus among member states on the criticality of this work, and despite widespread efforts to strengthen institutional capacities, we see multiple examples of the flouting of the rule of law and persistent denial of human rights. Like IDLO, the UN comprehends rule of law writ large, justice, equality, an enabler not only of civil and political, but also of social and economic rights. The sad truth is, however, that there's still a large gap between theory and practice, between what we aspire to in meetings like this one and the reality so many face on the ground. On our small planet, protracted conflict and fragility affects the lives of approximately 1.5 billion people. Even as poverty rates have markedly declined, we see growing inequality affecting social cohesion and threatening peace and development. Organized crime, terrorism, violent extremism, and corruption continue to affect citizens globally. There is hope in some ongoing peace processes, but we also know that populations often feel less secure in the post-conflict phase as armed factions concentrate and disarm, leaving communities that they once secured vulnerable to criminal organizations and banditry. In some parts of Libya, of Mali and Somalia, we know the militant groups receive support from communities they operate in, partly because of the services they provide, which often includes a form of justice and security that are otherwise lacking from state authorities. And we know that men and women experience conflict differently. In the 2015 Global Study on Resolution 1325, women spoke about their experiences of escalating domestic violence, sexual violence, and survival sex in post-conflict environments. A major factor contributing to this abuse was weak or absent rule of law institutions. The sad fact is that women are often no safer after war's end. The challenge for all of us is to figure out how to better capitalize on the consensus around the criticality of rule of law for peace building, and how to best use the structures and policies that we've been successful in building over the last 2 decades to do better in changing the grim reality so many face due to the absence of the rule of law in so many parts of the world today. How can we do this? I believe experience teaches us that the application of 3 ideas may be critical. Firstly, part of this is ensuring that countries emerging from crisis make the restoration of rule of law a national priority in their stabilization efforts, that they make and sustain significant national commitment with support from their own communities and civil society. Joined-up international programming can then complement and align with these priorities to build critical foundations. Secondly, it's also now fully recognized that the rule of law and development are strongly interrelated and mutually reinforcing. We need to build on this and ensure that interventions in the post-conflict phase already support development efforts and measures to reduce inequalities. The essence of SDG 16 is its specific targets and indicators on national human rights capacity, access to justice for all, including for women and minorities, and effective justice institutions. I understand that IDLO member parties have requested the Director General to ensure your new strategic plan maximizes IDLO's contribution to Agenda 2030. We know that strong rule of law institutions, if empowered and respected, if independent and properly resourced, are essential to legal and peaceful dispute resolution, while generating the confidence and stability needed for financial investment and a thriving private sector. Thirdly, in all contexts, post-conflict or otherwise, we must do our best to not only build strong institutions, but to ensure they're accessible and equitable and effective, while encouraging healthy and independent legislatures and judiciaries. This will help us create rule of law-based societies and generate a rule of law culture in which populations have faith and trust in the law, follow the law, and see the justice system as a way to resolve grievances and as an alternative to pursuing difference through recourse to violence. On a final note, looking forward, what is the future of the United Nations' role in rule of law development? As you know, at the beginning of this year, Antonio Guterres took the helm of the UN. IDLO was one of the many international partners that welcomed his election, and for good reason. After a decade leading the UN's refugee agency, the new Secretary General knows very well how the absence of rule of law affects people around the world and the importance of partnerships to achieving our common peace and development goals. One of the principal ideas behind the Secretary General's reform agenda is giving the United Nations greater impact. A central piece of this is to create increased synergy between UN entities and other international partners on country-specific engagement. This also means greater integration of rule of law work into peace and development strategies. As you know, rule of law assistance has become an integral part of peace missions and UN country teams' work. And the UN has been providing significant rule of law support in all types of country contexts on every continent. But progress and setbacks have also inspired us to work harder and better. Translating the 2030 Agenda commitments into reality is a collective effort, including through establishing new and innovative partnerships and maximizing the comparative advantages of all those committed to promoting the rule of law. IDLO is well placed to offer its perspective to link rule of law to social and economic development, as well as to promoting peace building and preventing conflict. We share the same principles and a common understanding of what we mean by rule of law. I hope we can intensify the collaborative relationship between the United Nations and IDLO with the objective of doing better at preventing conflict, sustaining peace, and achieving the 2030 Agenda where the gaps are greatest and the need is largest. Thank you.